We focus first on cancer in close relatives. We call them first-degree and second-degree relatives, which is about how many steps are they away from you. So first-degree relatives are your parents, your brothers and sisters, and your children. Second-degree relatives are then one step removed. So your grandparents, your grandchildren, and your nieces and nephews. So knowing about cancer in those close relatives, and if you know about cancer in more distant relatives, then certainly including that information is helpful too. What's particularly helpful to know about their cancers are how old were they when it was diagnosed, what type of cancer did they have, like where did it start, was it breast cancer, was it colon cancer, was it ovarian cancer. And it's also helpful if you know a bit about the rest of the family. How old did people live? What were other causes of death in the family? Because that can help to provide the background that helps in our assessment or interpretation of the history of cancer in the family. And really important is to know whether anybody else in your family has already started this process. If somebody else has done all the background work and you can then add on to that, it's going to probably make things a bit simpler for you. The next slide just shows an example of a sample family tree that we developed in BC that could be used in a doctor's office to give to somebody who's concerned about their family history of cancer, just as a tool to help to draw it out. Sometimes pictures can help to make things clear. This tool is there's nothing special about it. We just created it, and so any format that you can collect and keep track of information about your family history is helpful. There are lots of websites and computer programs that can help with this kind of information too. Once you've talked with your own doctor about your concern about hereditary cancer, you may then be referred for cancer genetic counseling or assessment by a cancer genetics clinic. Those referrals are usually made by a doctor, and each clinic is going to have its specific criteria for accepting referrals, a specific process that's followed, which may include asking you to complete a family history form. It may include helping to collect medical records. And the timelines for how long you wait for an appointment, what steps are required before an appointment is going to vary. So I'm not going to go into any of those details, but just that's the usual sort of first step. And what happens then if you are referred and will go on to meet with a genetic counselor? The focus of that appointment is on assessment of your family history for hereditary cancer risk with the goal of supporting informed decisions. So in fact, much of the content of that appointment is similar to the kinds of things we're going to talk about today, except that it would be focused on your own family history rather than family histories in general. It includes interpretation of your family history, your own medical history, and the chance that it might be connected to a specific hereditary cancer syndrome. Some basic education review about inheritance, how genes are passed down in families, how the genetic testing process works, advice about cancer screening based on the family history, a discussion about options for cancer prevention or risk reduction, other resources and research that might be available. It includes discussion about what difference this information might make to you as an individual, to people in your family, and the importance of thinking about some of those issues before any genetic testing is ever started. You'll notice that in that list on the slide, genetic testing is only one item on that list. And that's important for a couple of reasons. One is that not everybody who's referred for genetic counseling is going to be eligible to have genetic testing done, and we'll talk a bit more about that. The other thing is that not everybody who's eligible for genetic testing chooses to do it. And so the goal of the appointment really is to support people making informed choices with the information that's available. So to then talk a little bit about genetic testing and when might it be considered, the Canadian Genetics Clinics have established criteria for when we can offer genetic testing in our healthcare system that's publicly funded. Usually, genetic testing is offered when the chance that the test will find a specific gene that has an abnormality is at least 10%. So in fact, not meeting the criteria to have genetic testing might be considered good news in some families because it means that there's less than a 10% likelihood that the family history is related to a specific hereditary cancer gene. If there's more than a 10% chance and there is a specific test available and that result will make a difference to the person who might be asking the question, to members of their family, then the other key thing is that it's an individual's choice whether to go ahead with that testing. The person needs to want the information. And I'm going to use some fictitious sample family histories to highlight some of the issues that come up when making those choices. So these are family histories that have been designed to illustrate points. They aren't anybody's specific family history. They're also going to focus on BRCA1 and 2 genetic testing because that's the most likely test to be offered when a woman has ovarian cancer or when there's ovarian cancer in a family. We can talk about Lynch syndrome genetic testing later if anybody has specific questions, but we'll focus on BRCA1 and 2. So the process of testing the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes is like trying to find a needle in a haystack, or actually in two haystacks. It's also been described as like trying to find a spelling mistake in the Vancouver and the Toronto phone books representing the two genes. So the greatest chance of finding a specific abnormality, a mutation, or a mistake in one of those genes comes when the test starts on a blood sample from a person who's already had breast cancer or ovarian cancer. As this slide that says ideally start with an affected person, we would usually ask for what we call an index person. In this slide, it's actually a man who's had breast cancer, and he has a sister who's had breast cancer, and their mother had ovarian cancer, even though it might be his daughter who's the one asking for the information. So if that first index test is done and finds a specific mutation, then other members of the family can have what we call carrier testing to learn whether or not they have that specific mutation. We don't need to look through the two haystacks entirely. We can just look for the one specific abnormality that's been found. One of the common questions that we get is, well, why would I think about having genetic testing or be referred to talk about it if I've already had cancer? And this idea of needing an index test in a family is one of those key reasons. That can then be a challenge if that index person in a family isn't interested, isn't available, may have died, and would be the door to other members of the family having access to genetic testing. One option in some families is that if that eligible index person isn't interested or able to participate in genetic testing, there may be ways that they can have a sample of their blood stored in a lab so that it can be used by the family in the future if there is interest in that kind of testing.